guiding principles for the approaching budget reduction. And if I'm correct, it's about 2.5 million that we're thinking about, that we have to somehow come down. And I know, Don, we got those emails from some of your suggestions, but it's supposed to be an open meeting to talk about where things might be best cut, since we know that it's gonna happen. I'm sure you've all read about the university having to cut down 35 million. And it was also in the paper that they have 85 positions that they want to get rid of. I shouldn't say that, don't want to. They're thinking they have to. We, of course, would not like to do that. And so we are hoping that we can come up with some other ideas that will afford to allow us to keep the position. And since Mr. President has arrived, and since he has written 3 or 4 pages that he wishes to present you, let him take over. If you have any-
Good start.
I like the
Trustee.
support that I'm receiving.
You should have heard what was said before you got here.
Yes. Well, chances will also always talk.
You're fine. Catch your breath. Bill was just getting us going. If make a few remarks and then get a sandwich and we'll get started, however you want to do it. The big question was, were you chosen?
Oh, yeah, that's why they went right into the trial and they were supposed to be done and they didn't, so a couple more days.
We just, Mr. Chair, we just learned from our Dr. Joe that there is a way to not get chosen. But he obviously didn't share that with you before.
I provide that consulting for a nominal fee.
I'll share a story with you about that. But yes, let me just grab here what I need.
While we're waiting, I also just found out from my dear young protege and friend that he's won several contests as some of the heavy man, is that a big man, or what do they
Some
call it?
strong men and some Highland
Strongman.
games.
Oh,
Contests.
you want another one?
He's the winner. He's the winner.
So I think that we ought to beware of not crossing.
He's on my right-hand side here, man.
He'll protect you.
He's my
Will.
protection.
Will not contend with him, that's for sure.
Father.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I greatly appreciate it. I guess we've kind of, I don't know, have we had any discussion yet?
Not at all. Vice Chairman just kind of opened it up and made a few remarks and you walked in, perfect timing.
Okay, good. Well, what I had jotted down and was looking at that might get us off on the right foot, and I hope I present it correctly here as I gather my thoughts, was that, as I think you've heard many times with the governor's budget adjustment request, and additional information that we've received through Joint Appropriations Committee meetings this summer that Dr. Schaefer and we had talked about previously, and what you read in the paper, it really is highly likely that we may be looking at more than the 8%, which actually works out to 15% for LCCC when it works through the allocation model. And so one of the questions we'll have tonight is with regards to those principles, those guidelines that we want to try to develop and help provide for Dr. Schaefer and the staff, is that maybe we'll talk a little bit more about something in addition to 2.5 million. And that question, and Joe will come along to that a little later, we'll come back to that, but 2.5 million or higher and why we might choose to do that. And then I thought it would be good if I kind of tried to put some things in a context that we might be able to grab a hold of some things and work with. Things that we've already done, the staff have done, and the board has done over time is within our strategic plan, which we've looked at and utilized and reviewed here most recently. Trustee Erickson was looking at the review of the strategic plan year, both he and I this past year. I think that gives us some direction because we can look at those 4 major goals that are listed in that 2013-2020 strategic plan. So if we look at those goals and keep those in mind as we try to set the guidelines, I think it'll really be helpful for us. And that might also kind of help keep us out of the weeds a little bit too, but as we look at it from that level. Additionally, I think we should use as a guide Dr. Schaefer's FY17 goals. I mean, I think that's critical to have those play into what we're thinking about in terms of how we address the use of those resources and the reduction of those resources available. In addition, we just passed the budget, and on page 2 and 3 of the budget, we just passed here on the 29th of June. That speaks to the budget structure. There are some issues in there that I think clearly would help us again in the context of strategy, Joe's goals, and the budget we've just passed, to kind of understand how we're using those resources and how we might recommend some guidance on making that, developing that FY18 budget. Some possible guidelines that they threw out, just as things that we've talked about. They're not new and other people have spoken to these, but just to get you thinking a little bit about it. We've talked about in Casper at the GISS this idea of maintain and improve core academic programming. And it's not for us as the board to tell the administration, I don't believe, how they do that, but I think it's critical that we talk about what that core is and have some discussion and what we might see. But I think that guideline itself is what we want to work with and not get into the details per se, but have enough clarity so that the staff can in fact work with that. Another example, I thought, and again, not something that's unique to me. I didn't come up with this out of the blue. This has been tossed out before. And that is, in terms of we need to provide non-academic programming that's necessary if in fact, one, we're to continue the core programming. And secondly, I think if we're to keep in mind one of the goals out there statewide and for us is the Complete College Wyoming. So if we're going to focus on that completion goal with Wyoming Community College funds being impacted, because if we don't achieve certain levels, we are impacted by a reduction in funding. So we have to make sure that the non-academic programming is also there to support the completion agenda. We don't, that has harm for us. So those are just a couple of perspectives that I share with you that we probably will get into. And I really don't want to say anything more because it really is, I hope, a chance to hear your perspectives and views and share those. And Dr. Schaefer was kind enough to have the cabinet here, which I think is critical because as we have questions, the way we wanted this structured was such that we're obviously not in a formal meeting. This is a work session, so that as such, if you have questions of Rick, and we'll give him a hard time about which fishing pond has the best fish in it, but we can directly ask those questions. Those are my comments to kind of lead you in, and I want to apologize for being late. I know you know about it, but I'm sorry I could have perhaps done a little different planning and made that work a little better. With those comments, I'd like Dr. Schaefer to share some perspectives and take us a little further down that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, or Ed, can we dispense with the
Yes,
formality for
please.
your time? And I appreciate the opportunity to have the cabinet here around the table too, those that could be in attendance, because we really do, this is just kind of an open, free-flowing dialogue. To put it in, big picture context, basically what we're trying to get at tonight is a picture of the overarching guiding principles, the leadership perspective from the Board of Trustees about how you would hope we would approach these budget reductions, and ultimately what the institution should feel like, look like, be like, operate like after we come out of these budget reductions. And so to do that, we really just want to have a dialogue. I anticipate that we'll have a lot of brainstorming and have lots of notes after tonight. What I'll do then is go back and try to distill those into these guiding principles, and actually bring those back to you in August for I imagine a formal approval. At that time in August, I'll probably make a recommendation to you on a specific target for budget reductions as well, and have you actually act on that. And that really sort of sets the stage for how we will move forward with that. And so what we're really after tonight is just sort of those overarching guiding principles of how you believe we should tackle this. I do have some questions, and there are some things that are more mechanical that we do need to discuss, and I need to get a sense of where the board is at as a result of it. And so to kind of help that, I did create some questions that can just get us going, I guess. Before I jump into those and start asking and we start having that dialogue, are there any thoughts, comments, or questions that anybody has to share? No, good. Oh, bugling over there though. So I think the biggest question right now, and the one that we've sort of been grappling with, is how much of a reduction do we target? So I can tell you with some level of certainty, although things seem to change almost on a daily basis, that we know that based on the savings we've used and the reductions that will be before us, we have to make, at a bare minimum, best case scenario right now to balance the budget, a $2 million reduction for FY18. And there's a lot of ifs for that. When we look at the use of reserves, and we look at some of the other things that are happening within anticipated fluctuations in local valuation and how that affects the model, where we sort of left the budget, and the approved budget was $2.5 million is where we get in, where we think we'll be okay if we make $2.5 million in reductions. Now, there are some things that have changed, even that picture. You heard from Representative Nicholas at your last board meeting that the governor's approach with this 8% reduction to community colleges, which, as Ed pointed out, really equates to a 15% state aid reduction to us, that's maybe best case scenario. And in fact, there are people who have suggested that instead of 250 million, we should be cutting maybe twice as much. And, there are some folks that said we really should have been looking at a 12% reduction. And so the question we have is, is 2.5 million really going to get us where we need to get it? If things get worse, we've got some buffer in there that perhaps we don't have to go back in and do major reductions, but it also doesn't leave any room for the unforeseen, nor does it leave room for any type of reinvestment, whether it's into personnel or operations or whatever. We'll know more in October. I think we'll get a little update with the Craig report, but we wanted to just get a sense on sort of what your philosophy is. Should we just take this approach of let's cut the lowest we possibly need to and then read the tea leaves and react as we move forward? Or should we go through this exercise and give us enough room to anticipate for that uncertainty? Best case scenario, then we've got some room for investments. Worst case scenario, then we don't have to go back and make major reductions. And so, in the budget, what I sort of propose up to this point is 2.5 million. And my question is where does the board sort of land on that number and on this approach to doing these reductions? And then Rick, I may ask you too, we've had this conversation about whether or not that will be enough, and the risks that come with that. So Rick may have some comments as well, but what are your thoughts?
Mr. Chair, I am interested in, where is it? Okay, hi. What Rick has to say about the 2.5 million as to whether that is an appropriate amount. You know, we've been looking at 2.5, and you just mentioned something that led me to ask Rick why we would look at anything higher. So I think it'd be good to hear either from you or from Rick about why we would look at something higher.
Well, so a couple of things, and then I'll let Rick jump in here. One is right now the anticipation and the flux of the local millage, and the way that that actually impacts our budgets. You know, as I said before, I think Laramie County is really the only community college district that had an increase in valuation, whereas the other ones have had some pretty substantial drops, and that impacts the way that state aid then is allocated out. And it's why we're taking a bigger reduction in state aid than perhaps some of the other colleges, because of the way that works. There's still consideration and talk about additional layoffs in some of these areas. There's the potentiality that we'll see a continued decrease in valuation. The other thing that's going on that I just learned this morning is that the way a lot of the counties actually assess value, from what I'm understanding, it's almost in arrears. And Don, maybe you may know some of this with your time with the city. And all that, if you remember, even 2 years ago, we had a lot of oil and gas activity going on right before we really started to see the decline. And a lot of the revenue and the value, I guess, put on that type of activity actually sometimes doesn't hit till a year later on the county. And so we could continue to see another drop as a result of the decrease in that activity going into next year. And if we do that, then even if state aid were to say flat and they were going to keep it that way, it's possible that some of these counties, Campbell County, Sweetwater, Fremont, Natrona, would see a further reduction. And if they further reduce that, it could possibly impact our allocation. Now, it's supposed to be a biennial allocation, so I don't know how much that would pay in 18, but then it also leaves the impact for FY19, the following biennium. So that's one piece that's kind of moving on there as well. And then the other piece that's sort of the counter to that is that was some changes you may have heard in the allocation calculation for the completion funding component. Long story short, there was a miscalculation at the commission that actually had to be corrected. And when that was corrected, the amount of funds that the colleges receive for the completion funding, the performance funding component, actually changed some. It decreased to the tune of 1.4 million at Western Wyoming College. I mean, that's a correction they're dealing with right now based off of that. It decreased at Central. It could increase for us, but we don't know how much. And so that may suggest, okay, we don't need that amount of a buffer. And so that's kind of in place. So that would suggest, well, maybe we don't need to go more. Then the last piece is just where we ended up with carryover. You know, our budget right now was set where we were hoping to be able to carry over $400,000 essentially, and then pull 600 out of the fund balance to balance it. It's possible that we'll end this last year with less than the 400,000, which would mean would pull in addition some additional money out of fund balance to balance at 17. And it's all kind of coming from fund balance anyways, but that would suggest then that we may have a little bit more that we actually need to reduce going forward. But we won't know that probably. In fact, you guys will probably hear that at FNF on August 10th. You think we'll have a better picture, Rick, by August 10th?
Yeah, complete picture, yeah.
How the year end actually made out. And so there's pieces moving. And I guess if you're a liberal thinker, you would say, no, let's just do the least we can. If you're conservative, you want to build that buffer. And so we've been having this debate, and I don't have a strong recommendation at this point of why we would deviate from 2.5 million. But I also do worry that we say we're going to do that, we do 2.5 million, and just as we get into the start of FY18, we say, we've got to reduce further. So I don't know, Rick, if you want to add.
I think Joe has hit the key points. The only thing I can think of here that hasn't been said, and kind of the way I think about it, is we have to go with what we know and assume that to be our foundation until we learn something different. And so what we know right now is about 2.5 million. Yeah, I think we also have to, and Joe, I guess, did touch on this, we have to realize that this is a little bit of a moving target, and what happens in October could be significant, or not, we just don't know. So one thing I think about, and I'm thinking not so much at the board level, but more at the school level, we're gonna work to figure it out at a detail level, what that 2.5 million is. But maybe we should build that out a little further in the background, so that if we hit a worst case scenario, one that gets worse, we kind of have already done that strategic work to go further down the list. I haven't discussed that particularly with Joe or the cabinet, but I think that'd be prudent. So we have to have a solid starting point, and it's what we know, and that's what we know.
Well, given that, it appears to me we got two objectives. One is to prepare for 2.5 million, and then have an opportunity to, or have a means to deal with if it gets worse. So I think we have to establish a game plan toward a particular figure. And 2.5, I think, is the figure that we know at this point. And then if we want to have some corollaries as to, okay, if things get worse, what would be the next steps? That's the way I would look at it.
My thought, and I kind of pushed Joe to put this in there, although that's not my idea alone, but I was concerned that we are trying to do this in a fashion that's not knee-jerk. As you indicated, Don, we'll have that plan for 2.5. And I really appreciate Rick's perspective that if we plan for 2.5, then we need some kind of contingency. So if that's coming forward, we can make that adjustment without a lot of pain, causing some problems in other programs. I would hate to see us feel comfortable with the 2.5 and then find out we've got to, significantly increase that, and thus we're back kind of caught and knee jerk. So I'm looking, what guidelines could we give to say, okay, 2.5, and then have a contingency that looks at the 3. How might we approach it if that increases? And maybe it doesn't have to be a dollar amount, but it ought to be some kind of contingency. What do we plan to do if this is coming back greater? We start seeing it more than likely be the 2.75 or 3. What do we do?
Well, Mr. Chair, I would like to see us start at 2.5, go after that, provide the information, the guiding principles, as I hear Dr. Joe request of us, and get that taken care of. And then go on if we need to look at the contingencies beyond that. I think we need to get started.
I have no problem with that. I think that's great. In fact, that's where I would be, and you're saying we need to have the other looking in the mirror kind of thing. But other comments?
Okay, we can work with that. And I'll have to spend some time with Tammy and Tara and think about the contingency. I like that conceptually, 2.5 million, and say we put a $500,000 contingency, or maybe not even numbered, but contingency, how would we go next? But just knowing that some of these are going to likely impact personnel, how that works in terms of planning, timing, and all that good stuff. But I think we can probably put our heads together and think about how we might have a contingency plan that would maybe go the next step should we need. And hopefully by the time we see the Craig report in October, Governor releases his budget in November, the deadline we're working on for you is that beginning of December. We'll have a little bit better indication of where we might end up, knowing, of course, that all that could change come legislative time. I go through. So another question that I have, and again, just for your feedback, what role do you as a board members want to have in making final determinations associated with these budget reduction plans? What do you, decisions do you believe the board needs to make? We know that if we decide to terminate an academic program for say, the board will have to make that decision. Because it'll require your action, and then we have to notify the Higher Learning Commission and the Community College Commission. So should part of the plan, and again, what I envision bringing you essentially at the beginning of December is a plan in some level of detail. I don't know how granular it'll get when it gets down to things like potential personnel issues, but some plan that says, here's our approach to reducing by this amount. And then we'll actually have to execute that plan. And I know that if we execute that plan and it means we're going to close a program, you'll have to act on that. But my question is what else do you want to act on? Do you want to take action on the plan itself? What level of granularity? Some boards actually act on personnel decisions, others, and my recommendation would be to not. I think that's what you hired me for, but I need to get some indication of how the board wants to actually be involved in the final decisions in regard to. And I ask that because I don't want to just go on making decisions and then say, well, the board really should have had a say on it.
Perspective on that, Butch?
I agree with what President Schaefer just said. I think academic programs are going to be key, that we have to be involved with that, it sounds like. And that's a given. It just seems like in the next 6 months, hopefully this is going to solidify a lot as to how this is all going to shake out. It's, I think, very hard to plan going forward a lot about a contingency, because I think the next 6 months will really impact that decision. But I, for one, feel like you shouldn't plan for the best case scenario. You should plan for a case scenario that allows you the ability to be as responsive as you can to the needs of students and faculty. And my hope is that we're going to see hopefully some increased enrollment, some opportunities there. That I always think two ways you can look at a $2.5 million shortfall. If you can address revenue and cuts, but both of them I think they both need to have a lot of attention, and I think both of them then hopefully it's not as hard and as drastic with the $2.5 million if you're just looking at the cut side. But if there's some revenue piece that adds to it, then I think we can get to that $2.5 million maybe a little bit easier. But I'd like to hope that there are some pieces in the revenue side that we can address.
Just jump in.
Okay, very well put. I just want to say that these are really hard times, and I think this board really feels our pain, staff's pain, your pain. But what I would like to recommend from myself only is that we put the trust in you that we already have in you, that you keep us apprised, but that you make the decisions, because that's your job. That's why we hired you.
But excuse me. I think we're passing the buck a little bit. I think our president is asking us for, as he says, input on guiding principles. Okay, and I'm not sure what that means. When I look at a budget problem, I see we got to become more efficient. What are we going to be doing? And as I mentioned, I sent an email that I don't think I shared with the rest of the board, but I believe that we got to become.
Would you send it to, excuse me?
I believe I only sent it to Dr. Joe.
Oh, he sent it to Ed.
We talked yesterday. I shared it with these two.
Okay, good. I punched the wrong thing. And instead of reply to all, I think I just said it to Dr. Joe. But I believe that what we're dealing with here are not only cuts in revenue, but ways in which we're going to become more efficient. And I know, listening to a number of conversations at F&F, that Rick is really tuned in to that. And I'm sure that that's something that's going across the board with the cabinet. What are the ways in which we can become more efficient? Okay, then another is what are the essential, we talk about the core programs, what are the essentials within that core? And I requested that we have Dr. Joe and his cabinet present to us what they consider to be the essentials within the core. All right, then in addition to that is revenue. Okay, well, we don't have much opportunity to generate revenue other than what may come to us through foundation gifts. And I referred to one that it's probably not appropriate for me to talk about that particular gift, but whether any of the gifts that come forward from through the foundation might be available for one-time operating expenses. So I think that just Carol, I really think that we have a responsibility as a board to do what he's asked us to do with his stimulating us. You know, he knows how to ask the right questions to get input from us about what are the guiding principles. So.
And Don, I agree with you. I think he is asking us for guidance. But in the end, we hired him to lead this college, and I think that he sees way deeper into this organization than I do, at least. And we've hired really good people here now, and I think they're doing a great job. And I want to know, that's why I said, and keep us apprised of progress and what is happening. I don't want to go into this and, just have, and he would never do it, to say, this is what I've decided and you're going to have to live with it. I think he will keep us up to date. He will keep us apprised of day-to-day things that are happening and the vision that he sees going forward. But I know he'll include us. Is that correct?
Well, I agree with both
Yes.
of you, but the thing that is troublesome is, do we say to Terry, okay, you tell us which programs we can drop? And that's what they're considering at the university. If they don't have enough students in certain things, well, that one will go, and so will the person who's teaching. And so I think there's a big key there that we have to keep in mind, and so on. And we have to look at what programs we have that are unique and are bringing out people that complete them and do them and so on and so on. And we know, of course, nursing is one of them. And she was head of that before she got this interim job. But it's one of those things where we need your help, in my opinion, as well to decide, because if we're gonna have to drop courses, we're gonna have to be able to. I know we're not supposed to talk about history, but once before had this thing where the money was short. And all of a sudden, we dropped the building trades program. Well, holy cow, you don't think we caught a lot of flack around the city from dropping the building, but they didn't understand. There wasn't good explanation of it. And so these are things, if we're gonna do anything like that, there's gotta be a good explanation, and there's gotta be a reasonable amount to see if whatever faculty person is doing that can remain in a different type of position. But to willy-nilly drop things is not easy.
Well, I hope that hopefully, Bill, that we will not willy-nilly do something like that.
Well, no, I don't mean that we
Yeah.
would, Don. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we've got to be careful
Right.
about dropping things, because it can sometimes have a bad effect on our reputation to the community. And there are certain programs that are very well liked out here.
You pointed out that the board has to have some involvement, one for accreditation. And I think with regards to the commission, if we're going to eliminate a program, correct?
Correct.
So that really kind of covers, I think, part of what's being dealt with here is you have to bring that forth, you have to prepare it. I think the guideline that I'm kind of hearing is that those programs that we are keeping or leaving? And I don't know which way you want to approach it, but evidence-based decisions as to weak programs, strong programs, you already have information that you're providing us with in terms of program reviews. I don't know if they have the KPIs, you know, how that plays into that. Do we have those efficiency measures in there?
Yeah, we have a framework on the academic side at least, of which we can, and we'll have to enhance that with some additional data points. But we've got a pretty good framework. In fact, as part of our program review process, we have this program analysis component where we've actually been able to put our credit programs into quintiles. So 5 different groupings based on how they perform on these different areas. And that's one objective component of program review. So that looks at very much at the internal piece. What we need to do as part of this process is probably augment that with some of the external pieces. So it's one thing to look at graduates, and even probably graduate placement, but you probably also need to look at community need current and now for those types of positions and things like that. So there's a way to enhance it. In fact, as we think about, you know, being evidence-based in how we would decide these things, we've got a pretty good, I think a pretty good framework to look at the academic programs. You know, that one I'm not so worried about. When we get right down to it, we should be able to say, you know, these are the ones that really fit. These ones get further out, and Rick's helped us think, you know, sort of through how we might visualize some of that. When we get to the service side and the non-academic and those things, it's a whole lot more muddy to me in terms of what's that. So this comment down brought it up, this whole question about essential, and we've been talking about that. How would you define essential?
Well, that's the part that we as board members are having a struggle with because we don't have the depth of knowledge. So that's when I recommended in my memo to you, what are the essentials you mentioned in your budget message? And I would like, and I would hope the board would agree with me, I would like to see a listing of what you and your cabinet consider to be critical. Now, you've expanded that beyond academics to the service area. So I think it should be not only academics, what is critical, but also service. And I think what we need as a board is that advice from you folks who are in the trenches doing the job. And I guess maybe what I'm saying here is that we can't come up with the essentials. And so what I'd like to see at a next meeting or whenever that we have a listing of those essentials.
And we can help with that. And I'm not suggesting that you tell me what are the essential things that we do, but I'd like to know how you define essential. And I tell you why I say that. And yes, you know, I can certainly come to you and say, this is how we define it and do that. But the problem is we get real close to the stuff we do. And if I were to go to Judy and say, is your stuff essential? She's going to say, heck yeah, it's essential. You know, and so we're going to have to provide a framework for how we determine, well, how essential is it? You know, and you could step back and just do a gut check. Is financial aid essential to our institution?
Of course.
Of course it is. Out of doubt. Why is it essential? Students can't go. We won't be affordable. All those things like that. So now let's move out a little bit further and think about some of the things we do. What can I say without picking on somebody that we spend money on? Well, I'll pick on it. I don't know I shouldn't. Is athletics essential? Is the Children's Discovery Center essential? Is Gear Up essential? I mean, I don't know. I think because there's a slate of these things, you know, and then you have to figure out how essential are they?
All right, Joe, we have a grading system on our achievements. We need to grade it. We need to set a priority. And it has to come from most essential to the least essential, most critical to the least critical. And then we as a board, we either accept it, reject it, or modify it.
So that's another question then. So do you want to get to that level? I mean, that's what I want to start with is how do you see essential? How can we apply that? So I asked what the board wants to do. I don't know if I believe that I would want to put a slate that these are the things we're going to do away with in front of you and say, do you approve them or you disapprove them? I certainly have to put them in front of you and say these are coming with it, but You know, do you want to be the ones to make those decisions, I guess is the question. And I know where my preference is, but I don't want to assume because there is no roadmap for this in our guidelines right now. I mean, if I say we're gonna close Pine Bluffs, we're gonna close that one down, certainly you need to be aware of it. My question is, Brad, you want to be the one, you guys want to decide that? I mean, does the board want to say, yes, we agree, we're going to do all these things? And I could probably make arguments on both sides of that.
We approve, excuse me, we approve the budget. Therefore, we are making that decision. It seems to me.
Yeah, I would add to that. So in our procedures, 6.9E for a reduction in force, the definition is as follows. The elimination of existing employment positions due to the lack of or limited need for a curriculum, program, and or service. Semicolon. The reallocation of funds by the Board of Trustees, semicolon, or the Board of Trustees declaring a financial emergency caused by the withdrawal of current funding by the state legislature, the governor, or the community college commission. So the triggering events in order for a reduction in force to occur is for a decision by the Board of Trustees to reallocate money, declaring a financial emergency based on the withdrawal of funds.
Which I really agree with Don's statement that when we approved the budget, we approved that allocation of expenditures for Eastern Laramie County. If we need to step back and say, is that a service we need to provide? And I'm kind of halfway saying, I think we need to hear from you what your recommendation is, you and the staff. For example, I would come back and even talk about revenue that Butch has talked about. How does that impact us in terms of recruitment? Because recruitment plays a critical role. You're going to have to spend dollars on promotion. You're going to have to spend dollars on folks going out. And as we've had in this board discussion about where we're going to recruit, we've penetrated pretty well within this area. So do we want to say something more clearly on, we want recruitment with the expectation that you're going to generate X amount of revenue? I'm coming back to your question on essential. I'm thinking that if it's essential to what we want to look like as a college, what do we want? We want to maintain all of our programs. We want to continue our current programming and add additional tech programs. Is that what we feel is essential here to keep the image of this college as it is? And if we are, then what do we have to cut? What's not essential to that? What services can Judy do without? And yet provide us with recruitment of students and provide the success agenda. What could we do without? And I don't think that's for the board to decide, but rather for us to say, maybe you need to look at each of those areas and come up with some way to reduce them within the context of that 2.5 million.
And I don't have, and have the cabinet jump in here. I don't have the answer. That's why I'm bouncing this stuff out verbally with you, trying to get a sense of how to approach it and what's the right way. So, take the recent overseas combat veteran program. You guys probably seen the press about this, right? When the governor asked and said, take a look, Community College Commission, prioritize your programs, what can you reduce? And they went through a purposeful reduction, looked at utilization, especially at the community colleges, recognized it's a small number of students, predominantly at the university, who have additional benefits to pay for education, GI Bill and some of the in-state tuition, although this does help them go into graduate work if they want, and I think that's what they had. The commission made that determination, went to do the reduction. There was a part thing in the boomerang, and now it's funded again. And it's not well, no, and we don't know how that'll continue to be funded. And the reality is we can probably serve those students as well as we have always with the programs that exist without that. So I'm playing that over. So I'm working with Judy and we say that we're going to cut program X. And because we say that we believe we can do that, it gets here. And then you make the decision to say, no, I don't want you to do that. So I'm struggling with the decision matrix as part of it. That's one thing I'm struggling with. And then the other piece is just helping us define it. Especially with the non-academic pieces, we'll have to define essential and then say, okay, if we define essential as it does this, 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 and this, we'll develop metrics to essentially gather some type of data to say how well does service X do this, 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 and this. So I'm sincerely asking for your input on how you might define that. Or if you just say, look, you define it however you want, Joe, we'll trust you to do that. That's something too, but I don't want to leave you out of that conversation.
It's my opinion that you'll need final board approval concerning any of those final decisions.
For personnel actions or for programmatic offerings?
Both. Yes.
Based on the
Not
procedure.
particular personnel actions necessarily. So the decision isn't about a particular employee, even though it is, I understand. It's not necessarily based on the reading of our policy.
Is that a reflection of small programs? Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm looking at our ability to avail ourselves of the RIF procedure.
And my read on that is that, and by actually acting and accepting a 2.5, taking action in August, which I'll recommend that we need to reduce by 2.5, you will essentially be declaring the second clause of that we have a financial issue as a result of withdrawal of state funds. I mean, that's really what it is. And so,
It has to be a reallocation.
the second statement, it says an either or, doesn't it?
The reallocation of funds by the Board of Trustees or the
Or-
board declaring a financial emergency.
And I would suggest that they probably will, what I'll be recommending is that you declare a financial emergency as a result of withdrawal of funds, not necessarily a reallocation of resources. So,
A board decision to declare a financial emergency then.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is really I want to say the elephant in the room. I mean, it's very hard to talk about people, but if we're going to cut 2.5 million, I struggle when I go back and look at the budget. You can take a lot out of operations, and Rick, I'd love to hear your comments on it, but sooner or later, you've got to be digging into human resources to save that kind of money.
Yeah, this is something Joe was talking about a lot. We've already made some pretty significant cuts in the operation expenses this last go. Is there more? Probably, that we could get through. Can we get to 2.5 million just in that vein? I don't think so.
My thoughts are, and I'm just gonna throw it out there. When I think of essential, I first and foremost think of, the core and the mission of the institution. Start from that part, and then I work my way down. That's what's essential. What is essential to keep the college going? And then from there, I think about, return on investment. What are we getting the best bang for our buck? That's the second thing I think about. So in turn, what are we subsidizing that, it's not giving us anything back? And those are my main two thoughts just initially, is we start from the top down, because if we just start cutting things and it doesn't align to our core and our mission and values, then that's just it doesn't work. While that seems pretty generic a lot, I think that's essential in my mind.
Okay, that helps me.
Joe, how much-
We can talk. We'll get protocol done. I mean, we don't need to get into the weeds. We do need to figure out protocol and process and all that good stuff.
Right.
And what's the best way to do it? And there's a myriad things that we'll have to kind of probably debate about that to figure
But
out.
they'll need to vote.
To declare the financial emergency. And the question is do they also need to vote to determine specifically the actions taken to rebalance the budget?
There's one thing we haven't, there's one thing we haven't talked about right now is generating revenue. We've talked about the efficiency, we talked about the essentials that are going to be the priorities, and have a listing as to what might lead to the least priority that would be cut. You know, we are tapping into the 1 mill levy for this year, fiscal 17. I think we need to consider tapping into it again. You know, Dr. Joe and the staff presented to us the 1 mill levy for one time for fiscal 17. And I don't recall the actual amount that we are using over and above what we've had in the past. But I think that's a source of revenue, of continuing the use of, I think it's about 1.5 million thereabouts.
In total, but
In
what
total.
you're trying to recall.
Right. Yeah.
We keep this in mind, we put about 525 on the 1 million recurring.
Yeah, that's what it
In
says.
our $2.5 million deficit problem, that's, part of that is that rolling back onto the.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. Continue putting whatever we are this year for fiscal 18. Okay, that's another possibility. I'm not suggesting that right now. I'm just throwing it out on the table for us to consider. Another is that we have not done much talk on the BOSHIs. And the BOSHIs would generate, if we have a BOSHIs agreement with either District 2 or District 1 or Albany County, I suppose. There's a possibility over there too. But that raises a can of worms of how that would work if we were doing a BOSHIs in Albany County. When I say can of worms, I'm saying that because I don't know all the ramifications of what that might mean to us as a LCCC. But I think we gotta look at that as another source of money. But 7.5 would be about $750,000 just using the other 0.15. So I think we need to also throw on the table generating revenue. Okay?
One of
And
the guidelines you really suggesting is that we ought to look at revenue. The direction is provide us with optional revenue sources that might be available to us in terms of whether it's the 1 mill or the BOSIs or.
And I got one more,
Or not.
and that's the foundation.
Dual enrollment.
Enrollment.
And I think the foundation can help us with generating dollars that can be used for operational. That may be a tough nut to crack, but it seems to me that's another source of revenue. So when we look at our plan for the fiscal 18, I think we need to look at 3 ways of going after it. One is the efficiency side. And the next is the generating of revenue. And then the last is the reducing of either program or non-program activities. I'm proposing that for our discussion, that we kind of list it in that way.
So coming back to your last point about programs, you want to clarify a little bit more? Are we back to talking about?
I'll be happy to, because listening here, we don't only have academic programs, but we have service programs, okay, that support, obviously, our academic programs. So I just listed both of those so that it'd be specific, that it's not just looking at academic reductions, but possibly non-academic reductions.
Joe, when do you think you might have the academic master plan done?
That's a good question. It's gonna take the better part of the year, and that's
I kind of
unfortunate.
thought that. I mean, that piece might be a great piece to discuss, because it might really allow us to pin certain programs.
Well, and I think,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Well, then I guess at that point, you can say, these look obvious. And then look at the areas where we're struggling the most with is what is essential and service. And those two are just, they're gonna be tough ones to, and I still think that you and the staff, or you and the cabinet, are in the best position, have the best information to make some pretty wise decisions there. Not that you shouldn't bring them back maybe to the board, but you're still in the best spot to really look at that on the overall picture. But the academic master plan, along with the compensation analysis, I mean, because of the compensation and benefits represent such a big chunk of our budget, that again, that piece, knowing that piece and the academic piece a little bit might give us some pretty good direction as to how to go.
Yeah, and I believe, just knowing, so I think we can do that, even understanding from a master plan perspective, where we need to be going programmatically. I mean, there's two things that are gonna drive that, and that's really current and anticipated job workforce needs. And it's going to be really current and anticipated focus areas of our university partners. I mean, because those are really the two major areas where we're looking at. So if UW is investing heavily in X because it helps the state economy and all that good stuff, we should probably be looking at having transfer programs that lead to X, and things like education and perhaps even engineering. I think we can get to that early on in the process, and it'll certainly have to inform this. And then the question becomes, well, how relevant is this program? We've got some indication just based on enrollment numbers, job placement, things like that. So I think we can get to that piece, but we do a lot outside of even the academic programming. And that's this, every time, if you talk to campuses that have gone through this type of exercise, it's always the stuff outside of the programs. And, and one thing I keep saying, and I know the chairman shared this as well, I keep saying we need to preserve the core of our instruction. We have a goal of having 50% of our expenditures directly touching students through instruction. We're at about 43% of our expenditures, I think, this year. Does that sound about right, Jane? So reducing that further in totality is going to get us further from that goal, right?
Right.
And then we have that 70% goal to have it in things that impact students, instruction, academic, and then student services to do that. But to get to this and to meet those needs, that may very well mean that we have to say, okay, we're going to preserve the overarching core of the instruction, but we're going to get out of this business. And we're going to grow this business because that's where the demand is, the need is, the whatever it is. There likely will be some shifting, and maybe to Tara's point, some reallocation that makes it a little bit more interesting. And that's what I'm hearing for you. How do you generate revenue? Well, look for areas where you don't have capacity, but you have demand and increased capacity, right?
Right.
So I think we can get a pretty good sense with that. But when we get to the fringes, that's where I get a little bit more leery about, okay, so how do we decide, what else we do or what we don't do?
Well, for example, if you looked at a reallocation from one academic program to another, because there's declining limited enrollments, which is not generating then the income that you're looking at in tuition, and also the state funding model. How do we approach that? Does the board give you direction that says we want you to review programs and reallocate that will generate revenue, but to avoid as much as possible? I don't know how I would say it, but try not to impact people as much as you can. And you're still going to have to do that.
And that's the piece, and you're right, it's the elephant in the room. There's no way we can do what we need to do without impacting people. And certainly we want to minimize that. And I think the guiding principles is minimize the negative impact to people. And when we do impact people negatively, do everything we can to ease that burden on them. I mean, I think those are principles we'll take to this whole process. But I don't see how we can do what we need to do without hitting that. And just to the perspective, we say 2.5 million, somewhere between 20 and 25 FTE. I mean, it is a significant.
So do we give you guidance in terms of saying maybe you come up with a program for inviting people who might like to leave, as we've seen that our sister institutions have used, Northwest used that, provided early departure, whatever you want to call it.
So for come right back to that. So the one thing that I think we can do, and Terry, tell me if I'm wrong, so we'll get together and figure out what board action you need to take in August to satisfy the procedural requirements and essentially set the stage for us to do it. And then we'll figure out what board actions needed as we move down that process.
Right, it's just important to understand that any recommendation that the cabinet makes to the board has to be ratified by the board via a vote. So that's what I was driving at, kind of via this process, is that's probably how it's gonna look.
Yeah, and then, so that's the piece where I get confused. So there's two clauses, and it would be worth you taking time to actually, normally I wouldn't point you to procedure, but I would encourage you to look at it. There are those two pieces in there in which you can say, hey, we need to do something that could land in a reduction in force because we don't have the funds anymore. The legislature pulled them out, those types of things. But you also have the ability to come in and say, we're going to invoke a reduction in force because we don't believe we need program X or service X anymore. We need this. So we're going to remove this and to do that. And then you can actually invoke that as a reduction in force. And it's possible you'll see mixtures of both of those in this instance. The question we need to figure out is, does it then take a subsequent action if you say that one sounds pretty specific. If you're gonna not do program X, then we need to decide on that. The first one though, to say we have to make this up, we need reduction in force.
No, so the board doesn't need to make decisions about how that process looks. There's nothing in statute or policy that requires that level of decision-making by the board. Any ultimate decision that the college acts upon that results in a reduction in force or removal of the program needs board approval, which is what we're really talking about here. It's just a different way to get to the end result. So the end result is we're going to need to either cut programs or jobs with the reallocation of funds because we're losing 2.5 million. Obviously, we're going to reallocate funds. So that box is checked, right? So then what do those other two things? Is it an emergency? Are we declaring an emergency, or are we eliminating programs? What are we actually doing? And we're probably going to do both. And both of those things need board approval.
How do we sit here as a board and say this is justified? In my mind, I think I understand, but I just would like to hear your perception of that.
So I think it requires collaboration between the cabinet, Joe, and the board about coming to those solutions. And what I've heard the board say is, we don't have enough information right now. Really, those folks on the ground that do have it have a better understanding of where we can cut and make things more efficient. So you want to hear feedback from them. You ultimately will approve that feedback or say, I hear you that you want to cut this program, but we disagree. Right? We're not going to cut the building construction trades program. I've heard that's what you want to do, but we know the community loves it. We're not going to do it. So you have the ultimate authority concerning that. That needs board approval. But obviously this needs to be a collaborative process of hearing from your institution what it is they believe can be cut. This is a collaborative effort based on information you receive from them and information you receive from the community. That's how this looks.
Come back to the 20 FTE that you mentioned. Can you expand on that a little bit or give us a little more perception on that?
Well, basically what we did at the time was take a look at the average salary and wages per position, recognizing that you have, and we might even looked at the median, but I think we looked at the average.
I think we just made the assumption, let's take 50,000 and benefit it up and divide it by, the 2.5 million.
So,
Okay.
so depending on it, depending on how that actually shakes out, maybe, but that's why we say between 20 and 25. Also knowing we'll look for efficiencies and perhaps we find some revenue generation that we can do. And so the actual number, I'm not sure, but just doing the raw analysis, that's where we get at.
Interestingly, you don't need to approve anything for revenue generation.
Yeah. So let's talk about two things. So I think
You might want to get credit for that.
Well, yes and no. If, for example, we were to generate monies with a BOSHI, that require board approval. school.
Yeah, there are some.
There's, all I am pushing for here in this discussion is that we spend, and your staff, spend a good deal of time also looking at efficiencies and revenue generations, as well as identifying what is going to be maybe the least needed in program or non-program areas.
Yep, fair, and got that, and I agree with the efficiency piece wholeheartedly, and even the revenue generation. Some of the revenue generation, in general, I don't believe we can keep doing exactly what we're doing right now and generate more revenue, which would perhaps suggest that as a result, we may need to actually change things we're doing. As part of that change, sometimes comes a reallocation to generate more revenue. So there's some nuances with that, but the efficiency piece, yeah, I mean, I think we've done a lot. We still need to dig in and we need to look for those other efficiencies, without a doubt. So come back to programs, this is where I want to get some philosophical perspective, and we won't talk about necessarily where that decision lies, but in terms of early retirement incentives, some of our sister colleges have done that and said we'll give incentives for early retirement. And I'm not opposed to exploring that, but generally that is not the solution I would move towards for two reasons. Here, for one, we've had significant retirements over the past few years, and we've seen a lot of those folks say, I've spent my time here, great what you're doing, but I'm ready to move on to another phase of my life. The other piece with it is sometimes you end up incentivizing the people to retire that you don't want to retire. And that doesn't necessarily help the organization overall. It's kind of a blunt instrument when you want to be using much more surgical precision. And so it's why I don't like the concept of pay freezes, and I don't necessarily like the concept of saying, Tammy, what vacancies do we have? And just say, since they're open, we're not doing them anymore. Those are real blunt approaches to addressing these. So I have a hard time philosophically with doing that. Now, if there are people in positions that we may say there's a limited need for this program or something like that, and they want to say, I'd like to move into retirement, if they initiate that, are there ways we should have to work with them? Yeah, perhaps. But in terms of putting on a retirement incentive program just to incentivize people to retire, assuming that we can either one, replace them with lower paid new people, or two, hoping that when they retire, they'll retire from the program or service we don't need anymore. It's just not a very strategic way to approach it. But that's my perspective, and I guess I would ask yours if you agree with that, or.
I'd add a piece of that. It'd probably take 3 early retirements to equate to 1 FTE reduction.
3 to 1.
Maybe, because you got replacement cost, perhaps, and so it's just cutting it out.
Not true, because of the different. Okay.
I mostly agree. Really, seriously.
Sure.
I mostly agree. I have a little concern about the vacancy. If we have vacant positions and continue to go after those vacant positions, when we have capable people that could probably deal in an interim basis on a temporary basis. So I react a little bit to that particular philosophical negative that you have.
So using that, if I'm reading you right, let's go back to the concept of using funds from like the 1 mil and the foundation for operations. Because I do think we need to, address that when I started, the board said those 1 mil funds we want to have as liquid as possible to do that. And I don't know if I'm reading into it, but I think what you're saying is using them again, but for a temporary basis, or are you thinking we should discuss, and it's not just on, what do you think we should be relying on the 1 mil as a source of ongoing operations? So instead of reducing further and keeping that revenue basically liquid, should we rely on that 1 mil and move more of our operations over there? Because there's $1.5 million of revenue. The only ongoing operations we've had on there outside of this 1-year plan was the Eastern Laramie County Pine Bluffs Outreach Center for 150, 200? Yeah.
And the scholarship line there, Foster.
Yeah, and that's I see that more as a one-time for
You're
this.
throwing in a new issue, and I agree with that new issue. But let's stay with the first issue. The first issue is dealing with filling vacancies. That's a separate issue. Okay, we already talked about that. But I would speak, I was not on the board at the time when the board made the decision that they were going to use the one mill very, very selectively. And I think we're at a time, we're at a crisis time where that source of money needs to be looked at for operating activities. So that would be, on that issue, that would be this one trustee's response.
So ongoing or until the revenue picture of the state improves, or how long would we?
I haven't thought it that way through. It appears that other colleges around the state got themselves in a bit of a fix because they depend on that one mill for operation. So it would appear to us that it'd be prudent not to become dependent. But we're in a crisis period, and I think we need to utilize it.
I worry about that. I don't particularly think I mean, you've seen these other colleges get into serious trouble with that approach. And I don't think that's something we need to do, even given the times right now. I think we can utilize some of it, but I don't think it's something that we depend on wholly.
So there's a guideline there that kind of hearing that says we could use it for at least perhaps FY18 to assist us in moving through this period, but the intent long-term would be to move back to the original goal and utilize it for innovative kinds of activities and other projects that are come along that we need.
That'd be a good addendum to what I just had to say.
So if we get to the point where we say, boy, anything further is going to truly jeopardize the core of the institution's mission and ROI, in that case, then we probably need to tap into other revenue streams temporarily. I'm kind of pushing this one because the availability of funds concept and what's before us.
I like the way you phrase it, yeah.
Keep in mind your financial emergency piece.
Right.
One of the things I keep thinking about is, are we in a financial emergency or is this permanent? We don't know. This may be what we may be doing and what we may be deciding might be beyond it 1918 or 2018. And if so, then we need to think about what we can give up that will not harm the reputation of the college.
I was having a similar thought to, I'm not personally in opposition to the use of the one mill because it is there and it could be leveraged to help us. But if you're of the mindset that perhaps after 18, the state's picture gets worse, and if you put expenses on the one mill recurring, then when we get to talking about 19, we're right back to the bigger problem. And of course, it's a betting game here.
And Don, I don't know if you were thinking that. I wasn't thinking of using all of it. There's $1.5 million. We used some of it for Eastern, but we only used $525 last time. I would assume we might look at continuing that. That would be that 0.5, if you would, out of the two.
Knowing that doing so means we reduce the availability of funds for small maintenance projects, some of the other things that are. So I guess we have
What's the
to
trade-off?
measure those two.
Yeah, I think
The
that's
essential.
a good point.
How essential, yeah.
So
So,
can I come back to your essential list?
yeah,
Which
please.
has chipping in here, but we haven't touched on things like infrastructure. For example, if we were in a longer term fiscal exigency, we don't want the infrastructure to erode. We want to preserve it with this hope that we're going to get back to another place. So I think that's important to have on the table here, at least in my opinion.
You've told me about safety as well. We've got
I
it's
was just
essential
going to
to
touch
preserve
on
that.
the safety and security of our campus. And
May I say something?
Sure.
I've been poring over our budget for this year, and right here on page 2, it talks exactly about what we are talking about. Everything Joe is putting up there, we're talking about is right here under,
2 and 3.
yeah, 2 and 3. First, invest in what is essential. 2, cut non-essential expenditures. 3, temporarily utilize a portion of the 1 mil. 4, carry over unspent FY16 funds, and 5, stabilize through use of reserves. So it's all right here. We've talked about it.
We passed the
We-
budget.
we're doing this again, aren't we? But we're digging deeper into the trench.
See,
We're refining.
yeah.
Or we're
So that-
finding it.
That's what we did essentially. So you're correct. That's what we did to balance the FY17 budget to give us time. So what we've
Right.
essentially done, the true financial crisis here, emergency or whatever you want to call it, is that we have to adjust from what we thought we were going to receive and had received to a new normal.
Mhm.
Once we've done that, essentially for the purposes of your procedure and for you, essentially our emergency has gone away. Now, if the legislature comes back and reduces it some more, we may find ourselves in another one of those situations. But to Bill's point, that's essentially what we're after is that's the emergency, and then we set that new normal. Now, you could do that and you could say, we're just gonna wait and do what we can, tap into reserves, do other things and wait, assuming that those funds will come back. Revenue picture, we've been through the booms and busts, right? And they do come back sometimes. And we can do that, or we can take the approach to say, no, we believe this is emergency, this is our new normal, we need to make that adjustment. To buy us time to do that strategically, we did things like tap into carryover funds, reserve funds, utilize the 1 mil funds. And one of the things that we're sort of talking about is, okay, so now are some of those things off the table for FY18? My recommendation is, yeah, I mean, and it was when we set that budget, we shouldn't keep pulling out of our reserves to continue balancing our budget. We need to restructure that. The 1 mil funds, that's a conversation we have to look at. But as Butch points out, to what expense? What's the trade-off if we continue to tap into those for operations?
I think a question to start with maybe to guide it is to cut the initial 2.5. Do you want to tap into the 1 mil funds for that known cut? Or should that be the contingency piece, the second part of the plan?
Say we want to tap into it for a portion of it.
I would go beyond that. I really would. I would go beyond it, because I think we're in an emergency. I really do. I think we're in an emergency and that we need to have as much revenue generation as we can for fiscal 18. Now, I agree with the addendum that you talked about earlier, that this is not an ongoing thing, as you pointed out, that we will have it cease at an appropriate time. And maybe even say that we cease it in fiscal 19.
Well, the recommendation is only for FY18.
Well, yeah, right.
Well, I still don't think, I think we need more information. I think I would refer to Joe to say, okay, we looked at everything, here's the budget, here's the program, this is what we think we're gonna do. We're gonna need to grab operations. We gotta grab a portion of operations or all of it, I don't know. If that's your recommendation, after going through this systematically, everything on the table and say, yeah, we're gonna jeopardize the core if we do this, don't wanna do that, we're gonna take some 1 mil funds and start to close the gap a little bit. But if you don't have to do that, don't, leave it alone.
So don't start there. Don't automatically start that with the equation. But in the event you need it for that essential core, then we talk about it.
You move me to your side. I'm there. So easy did I slide.
Well, I think we're all on the same wavelength here.
Yeah, I do too.
That we're gonna utilize the 1 mil, and what was it? I think you said 585,000 or something.
25, I think.
525,000. That is over and above the other items that it was used for prior. So what we're really looking at is basically 500, about
It's not
600,000.
true, it's exactly.
Is there another source of funds in terms of we in the process, we passed this budget, but I think when we had discussion, we're already looking for places to save, right?
I mean, I think to Don's point, we need to continue to have the conversation about efficiency. And it's interesting that when it's couched under the terms of an emergency, we tend to find and identify other efficiencies that maybe we didn't see before. So, I mean, I think that's valuable work. But remember, it was what, two years ago, we took a 6% reduction, a mid-biennial reduction. Now we've done this, and you've heard me say over the years that I feel like we're digging into our operations. We're digging in, getting that first year, getting to move to the reduce our part-time faculty lines was really tough. And so what we did is we dig into our operations. I worry that if we keep digging into our operations, we're gonna have a bunch of people who can't afford to do the work they need to do because we don't have those operational expenses. That may be an overstatement. We may still have some room. But the fact that we're now talking about taking key annual operational things out of the 1 mil to support ongoing, and we're talking ongoing, we're pretty much talking about salaries and benefits. It tells me we're going to our last really operational liquid source of revenue, and now we're saying, well, let's maybe put some operations on there. It tells me that we've already dug into those operations. I think we can do more. Are we gonna close 2.5 million? No, not with it. And so I hesitate to get too far down to saying reduce those operations. We need to sort of get out of some business so that we can reinvest and grow other businesses that will ultimately, the way we're going to generate revenue is through increasing enrollment. And even there, we're generating 20 cents on the dollar based on the way that revenue flows. So we can increase it until we get new allocations and new biennia with the formula. We can find some efficiencies, there's still some there, but really what we probably need to do is stop doing some things. And when we stop doing some of those things, reinvest in the things where we know if we do more of, we're gonna get more of this stuff. So there are a few other pieces, they're just long, your point about the foundation, one of the priorities of the foundation is to grow endowed positions, faculty positions. If we can actually create endowments that pay for faculty positions, that actually relieves pressure on the operating funds. They have a priority to increase giving for athletic scholarships and those types of things. Knowing if we can increase the number of private scholarships, we can reduce the general fund. Those things are just going to take time, and so certainly I don't see we're going to see major impacts from that for the FY18 budget, and even possibly not into the 19 budget. But I mean, those are things we need to continue to work on to get to. But I guess the question that's still in my mind, because I'm sort of getting lost here, is if we tap into one-time funds, if we do things with those soft funds and all of that, my question becomes is for how long? Are we just sort of kicking the can down the road? And that's my worry. I think there'll be reasons. So if we have to close a program and we know we have to teach it out and it's going to take another year, might be a perfect reason to use the 1 mil funds for 1 year to teach that program out. But I just worry about tapping into those soft sources or those other sources, knowing that it just may be, we're waiting on the state's revenue picture to improve and for us to get more money from the state so we can then go back to doing the things we're doing. And that's the hard part for me is, do you just do what Bill was saying and say, hey, let's make that adjustment, get to the new normal. And then if down the road revenue projections come through and we see new revenue, we invest it into areas that we know are growing versus one-time, utilization to get through this until we come back to the new normal. And then we're back basically where we were.
If I'm hearing you right, we really kind of are looking at this vision then. And the reason I turn to that is because I say, what's the core programs? What are we doing here? If you look at our vision statement, what in there from career technical education, 4-year, those we would say are core. Basic skills, we've had a lot of discussion about developmental ed. Continuing education, community service programs, what are the expectations there? What are we spending there? What could we reduce there? Do we need to keep that as part of the picture of this college? That's our attachment to the community. I mean, you start pulling those away and the community then maybe doesn't have the relationship with us that we like.
True.
Yeah. And I don't know, I look through these and I'm wondering, you really have to cut certain programs. I don't think it's a choice.
usually out at the fringe, like somebody said, out of the fringe of the core, out of the fringe of the mission. The further you get from that, the further you can justify that they're effective, efficient, critical, based on participation, impact, ROI. You know, we'll come up with, we'll come up with those metrics. We'll be able to do that and get a sense and be able to say, well, these are the ones that are sort of there. And we'll look at efficiency. We may have critical or essential resources that are overprogrammed, overstaffed, and so maybe they're inefficient. Could produce higher. We'll look at all of those things, but it's helping us get to that, how we approach developing metrics, approach developing conversations on campus that you're helping us with tonight.
And just to kind of bring us back to the principles that we might articulate from this discussion is you're looking at the 1 mil because it's a renewable resource, basically, as though a last resort, it's on the table. You're not saying we can't use that. So that's a principle that you're maybe putting forward. And then maybe the reserves, which build up over time, would be behind that. We don't want to go there. And if those are the principles that we have to work with so that we know what tools are at our fingertips. Because I think a lot of the things that you're wondering about are the reasoning that we might bring to the table for what we recommend. And I think that's very fair for you to ask us for that reasoning as we go forward. But we will, as Joe says, we'll have those reasons. It won't be, because it's my favorite program or my friend is in that program. It has to have more analysis to that.
I think one other principle I'd like to keep in there is we need to have the services, maintain the services that allow us to provide the core mission of the college.
There's one thing that Judy you raised in my thinking, and I also asked this earlier of Joe, and that is, what is the comfort level for our reserves? What is the minimum level of our reserves? What do we need to make sure that we continue to have, so we have a big time emergency, we are able to achieve it? So I don't know if that's a guiding principle, but it's a question, it's a request to have that response. What is the comfort minimum reserve level?
So what's a big time emergency?
Well, let's not worry about that right now.
I mean, this seems
Because
like
we
one
don't
right
want that big
now.
time emergency.
I don't know. Sometimes it takes money to make money. And if you have the right approach and strategy, spend the resources to build the programs, to build what you need to build, to increase the enrollment and the core mission, then I think I'd look to you for recommendations saying, let's spend it to do this. Instead of just saying 10% or 8% arbitrary figure and leave it alone.
And I agree. I agree with you because saving money to save money, as we know, and we can debate this about the state, doesn't necessarily change what we do or how effective we do that. There is likely a threshold to Don's question at which we should probably always have a certain amount in the bank for unforeseen things. And I don't even think of the reserves as just what do you do in an emergency. I think they're also how do you capitalize on an opportunity you didn't plan for that you need to invest some resources into. I don't know that our threshold is necessarily some of our legislative leaders' threshold, which is we should have enough money in there to fully fund ourselves for for a full biennia. I think that might be a little excessive if we had $90 million in our reserves. But there probably is that threshold. I think commonly you see people use 3% sort of as that base threshold. I know some states, like the state of Montana, requires at least that much in reserves, and then they put caps on it as well. I think we're solid with where we're at.
But what is it? What is our reserve percentage? Since you're using percentages.
After we move that down, you want to say put 4% of that seem low? After we utilize the $1 million, what will that put our reserves at, Jane? Do you want to confirm that before you?
Yeah, I would guess about
1.7.
4.7. Now now we've got a bottom line. Now, I don't dispute your point that if there's something that really needs to be done in order to move this college forward, we might have to make a change. But at least we've got a bottom line.
And to Butch's point, for the right opportunity, could I foresee a place where I would bring you a recommendation to spend that down to 3%? Sure, for the right opportunity. You bet, and then you get a little bit more queasy when you say 2%, 1%. It sort of depends on the ROI and what the opportunity might do. But that's the business of taking calculated risks, and we'll need to do some of that. But we're strong with our reserves. We did that right. We've got it built up. We can utilize it. The bigger issue that I struggle with is utilizing reserves for perpetuating the status quo. When you're in the position of actually utilizing your reserves, you probably need to be talking about how does it reposition us to do something better, to get ahead of it, or to avoid a one-time crisis at some point.
And that's a principle. I think that's a principle that you just reiterated that Butch brought up. The reserves would be used not for sustenance, but for growth. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but.
Sounded good.
Opportunities.
Opportunities, great.
You're fine. I might use it.
Oh. Tara, I don't know if you, Joe, but, okay, I believe I heard that August, you're going to bring forward something where we might need to be declaring the financial.
No, I don't think you'd vote at that time.
Okay. When and at what point? I don't think the community or anyone should be surprised. So I guess what I want is that not to be, oh, look, they're doing that all of a sudden. I think I'd just like to know in advance. I think the board would kind of like to look when we might need to do that.
Right. When you have the ability to have a full picture, I think is best. So when Joe and the cabinet, we get more information from the state, when you're really able to make those decisions based on the information that you need to have. Joe, you want to add to that?
Yeah, let's talk. So there's the nuance of that. I do believe, but I'll clear this with Tara. We'll work this through. I do believe I will bring you a recommendation to take action on a dollar figure in August of what we need to target. And we will know.
Like the 2.5 million?
Correct.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
That.
But the question that will be is will there require, and it sounds like there will, some other board action that may be specific about declaring the financial emergency, and this is how we are going to address the financial emergency based on board action. So there will likely be subsequent board action to some fashion.
Right, that's exactly right. So, yeah, the 2.5 million, yes, vote on that. That's the recommendation. That's what we need to cut based on facts that we have now. How we do that then will come later when we have more information from the college and from the state about how that needs to look. And then you'll vote on that again at that time, on those particular types of actions for how that will be kept.
Okay, we're close about out of time. I want to allow people a chance for a nature call. But any last point about our principles before we do that? I'll try to get us started in our regular session at 7:35, okay?
The Craig report. Yeah, when the Craig report comes out in October, we may need to have some applications.
Or do we have to revote on the 2.5?
Yeah. But that, at least that's so far as. Well, I guess, I'll let get up.
Is it time for another cookie, John?
You want to have a cookie? Well, if you're gonna have a cookie, you select. I'll have it. Yeah, whatever you want.
Now that I breathe all over it, I'm sure I'll be just fine.
C Board of Trustees meeting to order. And would let you know that in terms of the minutes, we will not be looking at approval of those this time. We'll look at them at our next meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that brings us to our wonderful person who keeps us up on all this data. So with a bite of data, perhaps Ann, you would share a little bit about employee satisfaction data tonight.
I sure will. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, everybody. I'm actually going to go through most of this, and then when we get to the what are we doing with the data, Tammy Moss, our executive director of human resources, is going to help here. So tonight we're looking at the measure that was in employee satisfaction, and we use the Noel Levitz. It's actually the Ruffalo Noel Levitz College Employee Satisfaction Survey. They were bought out by somebody, and so they changed their name. The reason we use it, there's lots of reasons, but the biggest reason is there's a big statistical relationship and lots of research between employee satisfaction and how well we're achieving our mission. So that's the reason we're looking at it in here. Some background on this measure. We used to use an internally developed measure for this, but in 2010, when Noel Levitz first was developing this, we kind of piloted it. Then we used our internal measures for a while kind of as we were developing the KPI system. We adopted this one as a permanent measure, or at least a long-term measure, in our KPI system in the 2014-15 year. We had originally done it in the fall, but when the team looked at the results from that fall 2014 one and looking at some ways to improve the processes, we shifted it to the spring, thinking that the early spring, the 5th or 6th week of spring, would be a better time frame to kind of capture information, kind of reflecting on halfway through the year, how's it going. And so we did it again this last spring in 2016. In March, we were a little late. I was a little late on that, but we plan to do it in late February going forward. So we will be done before spring break in the future. One advantage of using an external instrument is we do get an external benchmark from this. So all of the 2-year community and technical colleges that have participated over the last 3 years will be our benchmark on this. Any questions on the background? Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I may have missed somewhere here, but how many schools, do you have some idea of the number of colleges?
I can get that for you. It's in the data. I forgot to write it down. I would say around 40, but I could get you a definite number.
Okay.
Then on the next slide, there's actually an error, and I apologize for that. This one is the grading method is used. This is the one where bigger is better. This is scored on a scale from 1 to 5. 1 is very dissatisfied. 5 is very satisfied. So we want to be up in the 5 range on there. And as we just said, there is a benchmark on this one. So we actually have 5 points involved in coming up with our grading system on here. And then you'll see the graph that shows where we're at. The first point on there, you'll see there's a gap. We incorporated the first point back from fall 2010, mostly to give us more data. That was kind of our starting place, but there is a 4-year gap in here. And so eventually, as we do this more regularly, that one will fall off of there. We are essentially the same in the spring of 2016 as we were in the fall of 2014. And this is one specific item off of the survey where employees are asked to rate their overall satisfaction with working there. So we're a little above 3, so that's kind of like, we're all somewhat satisfied. We're kind of satisfied. We're not satisfied. We're not very satisfied, but we're not unhappy either. So we're right in the middle. And the benchmark on this one was 3.87. So of all the colleges in here, they're leaning more toward the, yeah, I'll say I'm satisfied instead of just kind of. So we have room for improvement on here. This really just provides a baseline for us. And hopefully now that we've got a process down, we're going to be doing it regularly and consistently, we'll start seeing things going up on there. Any questions on that? Oh, I did want to point out that this slide, actually, it's not exactly the same as the data at the back that Vicki pulls from Eagle-Eye for you. This is actually our first measure from the next edition of the KPIs. So this is updated from last year, not that much change, but the new KPIs will be ready by the 22nd of August, I guess, when everybody comes back. Hopefully a few days before then. But, I do want to point out that this one is actually a measure for 15-16 that just ended. This is the first time I've been able to show you updated data as we've gone through this series. So, any questions on that?
When we look at the page which has what next on it,
Yes.
I'm just wondering, you may have answered that because this had not occurred before, or I was just wondering what might have occurred before to try to improve that, or when I look at this, focus groups are gonna brainstorm in September and then have some things they'll roll out, I believe, or give to the president's cabinet in December. I'm just wondering if the year before.
So I will address that since Director Moss wasn't here then. And then I will turn it over to her to say what we're doing now going forward. So last year for the 2014 one, we had a cross-functional team. There were faculty and staff and administrators, a subgroup from College Council that analyzed the data, and it's a lot of data, and came up with several categories. They lumped the items in several categories and kind of prioritized them where we see the biggest gaps between where we're satisfied and how employees rate them as important. And two major sections of this survey, employees don't just give their satisfaction, they also say how important it is. And almost everywhere, and this is across the nation as well, people are think it's more important than they are satisfied. So there's gaps. And so we look at the size of those gaps last year to set categories for improvement. And there's communication, there's planning, decision-making, there's culture, and we can share last year's report with you if you desire. But after we categorized it, the team actually looked more at process improvements last year, which we've been implementing this year. But we weren't as successful in actually doing things to improve satisfaction. So we are doing a lot this year, and here's where I'm going to turn it over to Drew.
But before we let her have the mic, I just wanted to ask you real quick, like, does this play in, or is this used somewhat in terms of the AQUIP?
Yes, in that the KPIs are very much in AQUIP, so all of the measures in there, the continuous improvement that we're trying to do there. So it's built into that. When we start working on our net systems portfolio, we're going to use what we're doing now to address some of the items in that. So it's not a specific requirement of AQUIP, but we are using those AQUIP, those continuous improvement principles to move this along.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Oh, yes, thank you very much. Appreciate
Any more
it.
questions for me? So we'll let Tammy speak. I will stay here in case you have other questions come up while she's talking. Go ahead.
So first, I just want to recognize all of Ann's efforts last year, because I really think that gave us a baseline to move forward. So the cross-functional team that she mentioned, we've kept that intact. But really, what's next and what's new is that HR has really become a full partner in this process where they hadn't been a full partner before. So Ann and I are actually serving as co-chairs of this working group to take the survey results and actually do something about them. So good work on Ann's part. And the cross-functional team has also included some other partners. And that is, are including the faculty senate president, the staff senate president, and then the president of the EA. So really, we think we have more of a cross-functional team and really a strong partnership. And so what that team has done is we formed a charter. We've had several meetings. We're kind of laying out a structure, if you will, of how we take these results and do something about them. So this working group is going to form solution-based teams, and we're going to tackle the top 2 areas that we found the biggest gaps, and those are culture and values and planning and decision-making. So what we plan to do in September, again, we're working on what this structure looks like, but in September, we'll start with some brainstorming solutions. So you may be invited to a solution-based team, which is like an open forum, and you can choose one of these 2 areas and come and give your feedback and be part of an action plan to make things better. Also on this slide, you'll see that these solution-based teams will synthesize their results in October and November. Again, we're trying to get on the cycle of taking some action and then evaluating it and then coming up with new things to take action on, or what do we want to sustain, so that it becomes an annual cycle. I think what Ann briefed is we've kind of played around with different times of the year to do this survey, and then I think we kind of got caught up in not taking action, if that's a politically correct way to say that. So we're pretty excited about it. This cross-functional team is really motivated. We're working on how do we advertise these solution-based teams? Where do we have them? Who's invited? It's really going to be open-ended, but we need to have maybe some ground rules and what do we want as our end state? So that's where we're at as of today, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Trustee Erickson?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this satisfaction survey, have you separated with the Albany County campus, or is it all accumulated in one big report?
And Trustee Erickson, we will not be able to disaggregate by location. That's not one of the survey items. The demographics we do have are length of service and employee classification are really the only 2 that we can look at. We haven't gotten there yet. I suspect that as the solution-based teams do some brainstorming and strategies, we'll start digging into the data that way to see if there are differences between the employee groups or based on longevity, because that can inform solutions that are developed.
Any other questions? I would look forward to perhaps hearing a report from the team in terms of what actions they're going to take, or I would assume that'd be December, November, somewhere. Look forward to that. I really think it's great what's going on. Any other questions? Thank you very much for your reports.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, ladies.
Board member updates, and I've got a couple of things I want to say, and then I may pick on another board member here real quick, but I wanted to thank the staff for coming earlier this evening and working with us in the work session. It was really helpful to have you here and answer some questions, so thanks for doing that. And the other thing, I wanted to say thanks to those folks who've been involved in cleanup preparation of the campus for the Thunderbirds. And I think that's, it's wonderful that the folks do what they do here in terms of really a community effort to make that work well. And I don't know about you all, but I'm looking forward to the birds flying here. And I think the campus looks great, especially with these new buildings. I hope they don't shake them too much when they go by. Okay, I did want to then look at the F&F committee, trustee Erickson and trustee Merrill. And Dr. Schaefer, if you want to chime in at some point with some additional things, but we'll start with trustee Erickson as chair of that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The committee, the F&F committee did meet on July 13, and we had our summary that we normally receive on the building forward updates. The Flex Tech building, I believe, last Friday received its temporary COs. They did get it? Okay. We did get it on last Friday. They're starting to move furniture in, and we're looking at our grand opening at the end of August. I have August 30th. Am I correct with that date?
For what?
The grand opening would be in the latter part of August, and I have in my notes the August 30, and I want to just double check to make sure that that date's correct. Anyway, it's the latter part of August. The Pathfinder building is continuing on schedule. There's anticipation that it's going to be completed in November. There's no major change orders other than the one that we had with the lab bench set up, which has been resolved. We had a very good discussion about wayfinding.
We did.
The wayfinding project, it appears to be, I shouldn't say appears to be, it is going to be delayed. It was to be completed July 22nd, and I'm going to refer to Rick to bring us up to date on what has transpired since our last Wednesday F&F meeting. Or maybe we could have our legal counsel.
I think we will leave it at that. The project has been delayed. We are working with the contractor to get it moving forward and on time. So if you have additional questions about that, feel free to ask me after the meeting. Very good.
One thing I would share is, and I don't know where the other one is at, but I did check out the sample that is.
The prototype?
Yes, the prototype that's out there. Are there two up or just the one? Just the one.
And where is it located?
West end, go on the west door and turn right.
Out of CCI.
Okay. All right.
Beautiful.
It speaks to the EEC, Educational Enrichment Center.
And much to the displeasure of trustee Merrill, this delay, I guess things don't always go on schedule, but it appears that it'll get done. And as our legal counsel said, if there are any additional questions, please feel free to ask Tara after the meeting. All right, we reviewed our financial statements and the procurement and contracting report, and I make a motion to approve the statements for the end of fiscal 16 as presented to us. So I make that motion.
I'll second that motion.
It's been moved and seconded.
In my discussion, I'd like to say that our trustees' budget was within budget.
And we are not traveling for the next year.
Incidentally, let's make that point. We're looking at not traveling out of state for professional education activities. There are some things that we have to do within the state by our various previous commitments.
Those we would see as essential.
Essential.
Yes.
Yes.
All those, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the reports as presented, please say aye.
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 All those in favor, or all those not in favor, please say sign.
May I make a statement, Chair Moser?
Motion carries.
Perfect.
Yes, you may.
Trustee Erickson is doing an excellent job of keeping an eye on the budget. Thank you, Don.
Well, with your help and also with our chair, I think we're a good, I was about to say troika, we're a good trio.
You're right. Thank you.
The folks here keep us out of trouble.
Yes.
Okay, Butch, would you have some information on the MOU or anything going on over there?
Other than it's signed, it's like, yay-hoo, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, was it last Wednesday night, Dr. Maltz, that the Albany County School District approved the MOU with LCCC to start the automotive technical portion of classes. And so I don't know, Dr. Maltz, do you have any numbers of maybe how many might be signing up or what the projected enrollment might be?
Yeah, Chairman Moser, Trustee Cadle, we have an enrollment report from the high school where they've listed all of the sections of the automotive courses that they're running starting in August. And there are 9 sections and they have 118 students enrolled.
Wow.
Will this be a moneymaker?
This is
Trustee Merrill.
it's good for everybody. It's good for everybody.
Are these considered to be dual? Since we're on their campus, are they dual enrollment?
Trustee Moser, it's a hybrid because we have concurrent where normally we would be teaching high schoolers with high school faculty at the high school. And dual, we use college faculty to teach the high schoolers at the college campus. This is a hybrid where we're doing dual with our faculty at the high school. So there's a lot of discussion about, wow, okay, this is new. So exactly how do we measure it and talk about it? But technically, it is dual.
Does the commission have some interest in figuring this out, or is there any issue at all?
My understanding when we read the contract and the agreements that we have, that there is no issue, that we could do it. It's just that it's just a third category, but it clearly falls under dual enrollment.
I think it's fantastic that that was worked out, that you guys worked hard to make that.
The community has received it very well. It's good news for our students.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, I see that October 19th, we have a board meeting in Laramie. And I'm wondering, would it be possible for us to take a quick little visit maybe to the high school to see the facilities? Is that, I throw that out as a possibility.
I think it's, I think we can do that.
I think we just have to look very carefully at the timing relative to all the activities going on at that point. Because isn't that also in the commission meeting?
As Mr. Chairman, members of the board, that will be a fairly full couple of days, but I'll ask Dr. Malm to maybe reach out to Superintendent Yanni and see if we can set up a time somewhere in there. And for those of you that have an interest and can make it, perhaps have a time to tour the facility and let's see if we can do that. They'll be in session, but probably in the afternoon shouldn't be a problem. So James, would you do that for us? And
Sure will.
Yeah.
Okay. Good suggestion, Trustee Erickson. I like that.
And only one other topic is, I understand that Emma Malm is now 10 pounds.
No.
That is great
And
news
she
from
will
the law
attend on the 19th, right? She's going to visit us.
Is she sleeping straight through?
From 11 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Oh, that's not bad.
That's great.
There's a great deal of efficiency. Okay. Under new business, I just wanted to bring up and ask Trustee Barker or Erickson, if there's anything to report relative to WAC.
Well, thank you. Yes, we are having our summit meeting that are on the dates of the 20th and I think the 21st. Don't correct that. I may be incorrect on that, but it's that week of the 19th
Of which month?
of October.
You're right.
Right
It's on-
here.
it's on the calendar.
It's on the calendar.
20th through the.
Thank you, Vicki, for putting it on the calendar. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. And the
You want to write?
the summit agenda is continuing to fill up. The theme is, I don't remember exactly the verbiage, but how do we get along in an economic downturn and look for opportunities to do things that we wouldn't maybe think of doing, given the fact that we're in such a depressed time. I don't have anything else to add on that. Do you? There has been, I do have one other thing. The board members of WAC have been talking about maybe having a retreat, maybe at that time. Now, it's so crowded during that time, and I don't know how they're going to fit that in, but there is a possibility that there will be a retreat for the WAC board members in Laramie during the time that we're there.
Thank you. Appreciate those comments and updating us there. You bet.
I would like to report that Smokey the horse has officially retired. And as you will remember, Smokey saved Joe from quite a wreck in the parade 2 years ago.
Sounds like a movie.
So I was able to find a wonderful couple that have parade-worthy horses, and they will go. We go Saturday. We're ready to go. The wagon's downtown. The horses are ready. Brooke practiced tonight. We're hoping very much that she found them to her satisfaction. And they came from Angie and Joe Weeson. And this was strategic on my part because Joe Weeson runs Knife River. You know, it's good to just try to get some people's interest and have a little connection with the college. So we're all hoping for the best on Saturday, and we will be down there ready to go.
Now, am I, Mr. Chair, am I hearing this? He's going to ride Brooke and George.
Me and Brooke will ride.
They're going to ride. Are they going to ride the horses for the carriage?
No, those two big horses. But I gotta tell you, we darn near had a wreck down there 2 years ago. And if you would have been where I was, behind them, watching this go on, Smokey absolutely saved the day. And it's because she's dead broke. Well, I think we have two more that are just that broke.
What does that mean, dead broke?
That means they'll go through the parade without incident.
Oh, got it.
So we're ready to go. And Lisa Trimble is just delightful to work with. I mean, that girl is something else. We're so blessed to have her. So we're ready. Okay.
Please pay attention to, as we've had some indications about those dates, but look at the next meeting dates and events. And I believe we have a pinning ceremony coming up
Tomorrow
night.
Tomorrow.
4:30 room, I'm gonna be there, 221.
HC, or HS.
I think, isn't
Yes.
it? Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe so.
So if you can attend that, I'm sure the students would appreciate it.
Mhm.
At this point, we're going to take a 3-minute break. We'll come back into session at 10 minutes after 8 o'clock.
Or 15,
Or 15?
yes.
Oh, you want
8:15?
15 minutes or
8:15.
8:15?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. We'll take a break until.
You need a motion.
We do.
Well,
311 is that.
we're just going to take a break now, then a motion will come later.
It's health science or
I believe.
Health science.
We're not going into the executive session yet.
Yeah.
311,
We're just
thank
taking
you.
a recess.
Adjourning this meeting, right?
No, we're recessing.
No,
Just reset.
We're
just taking
recessing.
a recess.
We're taking a potty break.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, before we do the recess though, let me check and make sure, as Trustee DuBois pointed out, public comment. Do we have any public comment?
None.
Would a couple of folks who are interested in pursuing positions as trustees like to introduce themselves?
Nice, nice, please.
My name is Jennifer Peterson. I'm a former student here and I graduated in 2007. So just wanted to stop by and see what the topics were tonight and see the processes.
Nice.
Thank you.
I was Sleater Dover, you may remember as the ex-director of the Wyoming Department of Transportation and the executive director of the State Bar. I do have some interest in stop playing around the house for the last 2 years.
Well, thank you for coming out.
Good to see you.
We look forward to it. Okay, we are going to take that recess until 8:15, and then we'll reconvene. Get that word right.
Because they have